Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be sharing how I made this really cute interactive card featuring Lawn Fawn Swish N Pop die. So it has a swishing and a popping element where the kraken will actually pop out of the water. And this was also made using the Lovable Legends stamp set, which was recently gifted to me as part of a giveaway on Instagram by my crafty friend Peter. And you can find his Instagram information down below, so I highly encourage you to check out his Instagram as well. It was very nice of him to run this giveaway and to send me this stamp set all the way from where he lives in Europe to Canada where I live. So it was a long distance to send it, and it was very nice of him to do that. So without further ado, let's get into the card making. I started by building a background using the new Lawn Fawn Plaid stencil set. So I started with a rectangle of light blue cardstock, and then I pulled out two different shades of light blue Distress Oxide ink. The one that I'm using right now is Speckled Egg, and then the other one is Stormy Sky. And I just picked these because I figured they were kind of tone on tone with the background, so I wanted something that was just sort of a subtle background effect with that kind of blue pattern sort of coming through, but not being too overt. So that's why I just chose two different shades of blue to go onto this blue cardstock. I wanted it to be very tone on tone. Now for each of the stencils in this set, there's one with larger stripes and one with smaller stripes. All you have to do is ink through them once in each direction. So here I am linking the thin stripes for the second time. So what I did was I used Speckled Egg on the stencil with the larger stripes and Stormy Sky on the stencil with the smaller stripes. And that's how I got that sort of two-toned effect. So I put that aside, and now I'm working on stamping out all of these cute images from that Lovable Legends stamp set. Again, this was gifted to me by Peter, and it is a bit of an older set, but it's one that I didn't have, and it has the most adorable critters. All of these, of course, legendary critters like the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Kraken. So I'm stamping them all out onto a piece of Neenah Solar White paper, and I'm using my Gina Designs Amalgam ink because it's very nice and Copic friendly, so it won't smear when I use my Copic markers to color in these images. I'm just stamping them out in my mini Misty tool so that I can get it really nice and crisp and black by stamping them out twice. Now the stamp set also comes with a few tree images, and for these I used a couple different green inks so that I can have some trees in different shades. So I used a dark green ink for a few of them, and then I used some light green ink for a few others, and I'm just stamping them out multiple times so that I can have sort of multiple trees adorning the scene, which I think are really adorable. It's nice when you have these solid images that you can use different colors to stamp out. That way you don't have to actually color them in. It sort of colors them in for you. So it's a nice way to add color into a scene in a very easy way. So I'm just kind of filling up the rest of this paper with a few more trees, and then I'm going to move on to the coloring. So for these images, like I mentioned, I'm using my Copic markers, and for each of them I'll just kind of walk you through exactly what my coloring method was. If you're not interested in watching the coloring, of course, feel free to skip ahead in the video and you can see the rest of the card coming together later, especially the interactive part. Now for the Yeti, I'm just using a very light warm gray shade, I think it's W1, to color just around some of the edges, and that just gives a little bit of shadowy dimension to an image that I think would otherwise want to be white. So just so that it's not like a plain flat white, it's always nice just to add a little bit of shadow here and there, just to kind of give a little bit of extra dimension and realness to the image. So the Yeti was definitely the easiest of these images to color, and now I'm moving on to the Loch Ness Monster, which I'm coloring in this yellow color. I don't know if the Loch Ness Monster has like an official color it's supposed to be. I had no idea, so all I did was choose that I wanted it to be yellow, and I went with that. So I started by using sort of a darker yellow shade. I think I used Y21, and I put it in areas where I thought there would be shadow. And then I came back in with a lighter yellow shade. I think that's Y00, and I'm just kind of blending out the Y21 and just kind of having it be a little bit less harsh of an edge. When I'm done that, I'm then coming back in with that dark shade, the Y21, and adding it again just to add sort of an extra layer of boldness and dimension to those shadows. Now for the Kraken, I'm doing a very similar thing, but with purple. So I'm starting with a darker shade of purple. This is BV02, and I'm just coloring it in places where I think there might be shadow. Then I'm coming in with a lighter shade, which is BV00, and just kind of blending that darker shade out so that the edges aren't so harsh and allowing sort of the dark to stay in the shadowy areas. For this one, I did decide to come back in with an even darker shade, this is BV04, and add extra darkness because I thought the shadows weren't quite pronounced enough. So I came back in with BV04 and then blended it out again with the lighter shade BV02 and the even lighter shade BV00. I do apologize for the lighting. There was some light coming in through my window at this time. You can see it moving as the sun goes over the sky. And it was really nice to have the sun coming in, and I kind of didn't quite realize how it might be affecting the video, so I do apologize for the weird lighting. So I'm just finishing off the coloring by adding some color to all these little images. The little pirate ship is so cute, and then of course some of those little bubbles and things. So now I'm going to put together the Swish and Pop. So I've got my plaid pieces in the background, and I've also die cut out some scene pieces, being that hillside in white and some water in blue glitter. I cut out the Swish and Pop pivot piece in acetate, and then the pull tab in white cardstock twice. I like to do this because I like it to be extra thick and sturdy, so I'll glue those together. Then you have this piece that cuts those 4 little holes, and I'm going to cut this into the background, which is the plaid piece. And those 4 little holes will kind of give you 4 options for where you want your Swish and Pop mechanism to sort of pivot from. And the really important thing to note here is that you want those dots to be cut at least the length from the bottom that that bar is on the die. Kind of struggling where to put it here, but I finally get it. So here you can see that that bar is going to the end of the panel, and that tells you that your dots are far enough up. So once you've got that, you can tape it on and then run it through your die cutting machine, and when you bring it back, it will have those 4 little dots just pierced in, and that's again where your Swish and Pop mechanism will pivot from. Okay, so now it's time to actually put the pivoting mechanism together. So for this, like I mentioned, I'm just starting by gluing those 2 pull tab pieces together to make them extra sturdy. I like to do this so that the pull tab doesn't bend when you push it back and forth. And then I'm taking a couple mini brads, and I'm going to put the first one through the pull tab piece and then through the hole on the end of the pivot piece, so farthest away from sort of the pivoting arm. And then I'm going to take a second brad, put it through the second hole just on the pivoting piece, so the clear pivoting piece, and put that directly through the panel that I want it to pivot from, so the plaid panel. So there's one brad that goes through the pull tab onto the end of the pivoting piece, and then there's a second brad that goes through the pivoting piece in its second hole and then through the panel. So I hope that makes sense, and you can kind of see it in the video here, the 2 different brads. I also die cut that little notch into the hillside panel that will allow space for the pull tab to sort of peek out and tell the person who gets this card that they can pull the pull tab. So when you're die cutting that, you just want to make sure it lines up on your panel where that pull tab is actually coming out. You can just kind of eyeball it and then die cut it. Now I'm gluing these water pieces and the hillside piece together so that they form sort of one big panel that will be the panel that completely covers up the pivoting pull tab. So once they're together, they kind of act like one panel, and then I can add some foam onto the back of it and elevate it up above the plaid panel so that the pivot has space to move. So I'm just adding some foam tape along the bottom here. And when you're doing this, really the key to remember is that that foam tape does not interfere with the pivoting mechanism. So the good thing to do is just test it, make sure that when you're adding your foam that the pivoting still works and that everything is still good and movable. And that way you'll know that you haven't impacted it in any way. Now I decided that I wanted to move the pivoting mechanism over one dot on the panel. So you know how the panel you die cut those 4 holes? I wanted it to be in the next hole over from where it was. So this is showing you that that's totally doable if you change your mind and you want it to be coming through a different hole. Just pull the brad out from the panel and stick it back in. You kind of have to stick your fingers down behind that panel, but it works totally fine. So once I was happy with that, I stuck the Kraken onto that pivoting clear piece and then cut off the excess so that when you pull the panel, or when you pull the pull tab, that Kraken pops out from behind the hillside. Now, when the Kraken is fully, I guess, put down, the pivoting mechanism is fully down, the Kraken does sort of stick out from the hillside a little bit, but that's totally fine. I knew I had some other images that I was going to be placing there that will cover it up. So it's okay that it still sticks up a little bit, even when it's mostly, pulled down. I also cut out the die cut the little piece that covers that pull tab with a little arrow that tells the recipient to pull it out of some yellow cardstock, just to kind of have it stick out. So that way it's very obvious that the recipient should pull that pull tab and have the Kraken come out, or release the Kraken. So after that, the mechanism is mostly done, and now it's just sort of about finishing the rest of the card so that the mechanism still works and nothing impacts it. So what I'm doing is I'm gluing down a lot of images onto this hillside, and this is all sort of raised up. So this will all be in front of the Kraken as it swishes and pops, so it won't actually impact the movement in any way. And the thing really to keep in mind when you're building a card like this is just to make sure you don't glue or stick anything down within sort of the movement area of that Swish and Pop mechanism. So sort of that arc of where it swishes and pops, you don't want anything to block it, or else it won't swish and pop. It'll get in the way. So just keep that in mind. I'm not gluing down anything into the sky here. I'm just gluing everything down onto that front panel, so that will all be in front of the Kraken as it swishes and pops in the background. So I glued down the Yeti, and then I glued down a bunch of the trees, and finally I'm taping down this Loch Ness Monster into the water, just using a mixture of glue and double-sided tape so that it sticks down to that glitter paper really nicely. And then for a few final touches, I can do the same thing with that little pirate ship and some of the bubbles and other little accent images as well, just to sort of fill out the scene. As I go along, I will keep reiterating the importance of just sort of testing your mechanism and just making sure that nothing you've done has impacted its path of motion. I will say the one thing I learned from doing this is that having the Swish and Pop pivot be this way with the notch on the left side of the panel, the image that's swishing and popping sort of interferes with itself a little bit. It sort of interferes with the pull tab as it kind of comes back. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's a little bit of a finicky mechanism this way. Okay, so for the sentiment, I stamped out You're a Legend, which comes from that same stamp set, in black ink onto a piece of pearlescent vellum, which I cut down into a strip. And then I just glued that at the top of the panel. So to finish off the card, I glued some green pattern paper onto a card base as a border, and then I can glue this whole interactive panel straight down onto it. And you can see here that when you pull the pull tab, that Kraken swishes and pops. I'm just adding a little bit of extra dimension behind the Loch Ness Monster to stabilize it. And there it is. That is the finished card. So this type of interactive mechanism definitely takes a little bit of work to come together, but when it does, it's so much fun. You can see how that Kraken is released when you pull the pull tab. And here you can kind of see what I was mentioning about the finickiness of it. It sort of sticks onto its own pull tab as it goes back down, but with a little bit of patience and sort of just testing it out and pushing it down the right way, you can get it to work. So it's not terrible, it's just a little bit finicky. So that is the final card for today. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned a little bit about swish and pop mechanisms from watching this video. If you want to see more of my cards, make sure to head over to my Instagram account, which is linked down in the video description below, and check out that description for some other information about the supplies I used in this card as well. Thank you again, Peter, for gifting me this set. It was so much fun to use, and I hope everyone watching has a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye!